With the Soul Series and the 2023 season officially underway, it was time to give my predictions on the complete season, including awards, division standings, playoff performances, as well as the World Series winner and MVP. If you enjoyed this sort of video, please be sure to subscribe. Tell me what all I got wrong. I know you guys will be feverishly typing. And let's go ahead and get into the video. To start out, let's go ahead and go to the American League East, where I have the Baltimore Orioles finishing first in the division with a 102-60 record. I think it's fair to say that the Baltimore Orioles pretty much dominated this division last season, and I think they only got better bringing in Corbin Burns, who I think is set to have a phenomenal year this year, as well as Craig Kimbrell to fill that role for Felix Bautista, who will unfortunately be going through Tommy John surgery. And then they're also going to have any pick of the litter from that plethora of talent they have in the minors. We all have heard about Jackson Holliday, but the list of this prospects for this team just continues on, and you really cannot say enough about where this team is at. They are in a position to succeed not only now, but for a very long time. And I have them finishing atop the division just ahead of the Yankees, who I have finishing at a 95-67 record. The New York Yankees, I thought, had a really good offseason bringing in Juan Soto as well as Marcus Stroman. And they will have some issues early on in the season just because Garrett Cole is going to be out for some time. But I think this team should rebound. They do have a lot of horses on this team and a lot of older veterans who should be due to bounce back in some way. So I think they are going to be fine, and I think they will finish the year second in the division. Similarly, finishing third in the division is the Toronto Blue Jays. I just don't think they really did much of this roster that improves it or makes it that much worse. And I have them finishing relatively in the same spot with the same exact record as last season with an 89-73 record. Moving down a few spots is the Tampa Bay Rays. I really hated their offseason. I really thought they moved in the wrong direction. It's the Tampa Bay Rays. They do this every offseason where they just trade off all their good players and somehow they're still good. But I really hate the direction they headed, and I'm sure they're just due to prove me wrong again. And then there's the Boston Red Sox, who also had a pretty atrocious offseason. I had them finishing with a 68-94 record. It's just not a team I have a lot of faith in at this point. They've lost all of their, hopeful, bounce back players that you would hope could make an impact for this team next year. And it's really just the Rafael Devers show at this point. And I just don't have a lot of faith in that. Moving to the American League Central, we're again going to see a team that won the division last year, winning it again this year, and that is the Minnesota Twins, finishing with a 92-70 record. While this team did lose a lot in the free agent class, I do think that they have a strong young core that should be able to propel this team back to the playoffs. I think they really showed out last year, especially whenever it came to the playoffs, that they have the pedigree to really stick as a core and be phenomenal together as a group. And I don't necessarily think that the pieces that they lost will change the dynamic of this team too much. With that being said, I do think they will have some teams in competition with them, and that will be kind of narrowing that gap. And one of them being the Kansas City Royals, who also have a nice young core to build around. It's not just Bobby Witt Jr. You have Michael Garcia, you have MJ Melendez. You have a few nice horses in there. Not to mention they brought in a few nice free agent additions, not world beaters by any means, but guys that could definitely be solid in that stadium, especially on the pitching side. And I just think they're a team that's due to win a few more games this season. A team that everybody's expecting to kind of move forward, but I think will take a step back is the Detroit Tigers. We all know they're at that weird spot where they were kind of thinking about going all in last year to try to make the playoffs, but it didn't really make too much sense, and I don't think it still makes sense. They didn't really add too much in free agency. Added a couple of low-risk, high-reward type signings, but it wasn't enough to move the needle for me to think that this team will make the playoffs in any capacity. I have them finishing with a 75-87 record. Very similarly for the Cleveland Guardians, this is a team that I felt like needed some juice brought in the offseason, and they didn't do it. They didn't do it at all. It was really kind of disappointing, and I have them finishing with a 74-88 record. And then you have the Chicago White Sox, who are very obviously just getting rid of all their talent. You really look at that team, it's pretty much down to the bare bones of Yoan Moncada, Eloy Jimenez, and Luis Robert, but it's just, they're down to the bare bones. The Dylan Cease trade really just packed that in, and they have a 62-100 record on their way as a result of that. In the American League West, there's really three teams you could really pick to win this division, in my opinion. But I think I went with the traditional pick here with the Houston Astros. I think they'll be hungry to prove that they are still, the leaders of this division after last year's playoff series against the Rangers. I have them finishing with a 95-67 record. This is just a really solid team, and once again, they went out and got better. Grabbing Josh Hader off of free agency was exactly what this team needed. I still have some question marks about the back end of that rotation, but I think top to bottom, this is a really complete roster that should again be in contention to not only make the playoffs but do damage in them. Another team that beat them in the postseason last year was the Texas Rangers. I think they're going to have a really similar story to last year. They have the pitching staff to do it, but it's going to take some time for them to show up. A lot of them will come back, later in the year. You look at Max Scherzer and Jacob DeGrom both coming back from injury. Later in the year, it's just off the rip. I think they're going to start slow and then they're going to get hot as the season goes on. The lineup is just as about as stacked as it gets. And while they did lose a lot of quality depth, I think they will turn it around come second half of the season. And then a lot of people are expecting the Seattle Mariners to kind of make that next step. But I really did not enjoy their offseason too much. I understand that they kind of felt like they needed to make an overhaul of some of their players because it's literally the definition of insanity to keep doubling down on a roster that's just not working. But I don't think they moved on from the right players. I love Teoscar Hernandez. I think if he can get with the right situation that coaches him properly about, cutting down on strikeouts, increasing walks, this guy could be absolutely phenomenal. And kind of the same thing with Eugenio Suarez, but obviously the Seattle Mariners did not see that the same way. Possibly my biggest surprise take from the AL West is I have the Oakland Athletics not finishing last. That's right. I have them finishing with a 70-92 record. And I think that they will not finish last. I think the Athletics actually have a few nice pieces in there. Estoy Ruiz was really grabbing all the headlines, but he's looked like a world beater this spring. But that's not even their best player by any means. You have Zach Gelof, who's looked phenomenal. Ryan Noda has looked great. Shane Langeliers had his moments. Like, you have a few nice pieces in here. They brought in a few nice pieces on the starting pitching side who are looking to, have some redemption this year. I think this is a team that's not going to win a lot of games, don't get me wrong. But whenever you look at them, I don't think they're a last place team anymore, especially whenever you have the Los Angeles Angels, who aside from Mike Trout, continue to just not add to this team whatsoever. They continue to just ignore the starting pitching, which has been an issue for probably the last decade or so. And I think Mike Trout's injury prone at this point. He hasn't put together a full season in quite some time. He gets injured, I could see it all falling apart and this team finishing 64-98. Heading back to the National League, let's go to the East and talk about the brewing rivalry between the Atlanta Braves and Philadelphia Phillies. The Atlanta Braves have been pretty much the victors of the regular season series so far, but the Phillies turn up for the postseason, and I think that continues here in 2024. I think the Atlanta Braves have a more star-studded roster top to bottom that should propel them to wins whenever, this amplify of the playoffs isn't necessarily there. You look at the Atlanta Braves, they've been putting up over 100 wins consistently, and I think that continues with a 103-59 record. And then the Phillies, I think, will be a lot better in the regular season this year. I think having Kyle Schwarber out of the field, to be honest, really unlocked this team. You put Rojas on center, he was phenomenal. Not great with the bat, but he's going to play elite defense, and that should help out. Put Harper at first also makes sense. This is a team that on paper just makes a lot more sense now that all the roles are kind of figured out, and I have them finishing with a 97-65 record. On the other side, we have the rest of this division, and then we have to start with the New York Mets, who I have finishing with a 79-83 record. I think the stars of this team are absolutely phenomenal. You look Lindor, Alonso. It's just a good group of players. You also have the catcher. Just a great group, but then the rest of this team really took a hit after they had so much dead money and contracts for players that aren't even on this team anymore. And it's tough to see because you have a good group of players, but then they just don't have the depth around them to really be a world contending team like they were, coming into last year, in my opinion. And then you have the Miami Marlins, who always seem to outperform expectations just a little bit, just enough to sneak into the back end of the playoffs or something. But I just don't see it with this team. I don't think they got better over the offseason. I just don't think they added enough to really be a contender in any means. I just think they're kind of just this middle of the road team that's going to finish 77-85. And then you have the Washington Nationals sat at the bottom of the division. I am starting to quickly like this Washington Nationals team, especially the prospects that will be coming up towards the second half of the year. I think this is a really exciting time to be a Washington Nationals fan. Going to be a team that's exciting to watch in the second half of the year. Yeah, they're not going to be great this year. They're probably still going to be finishing at the bottom of the division, but I think the time is coming soon. In the National League Central, I thought it was probably the toughest division to call just because if you put any 5 of these teams in the first place slot, I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you that heavily. And first, I had the Chicago Cubs. I thought they did a lot of smart things in terms of they brought back a lot of the players they had from last season. This is a team that underperformed pretty heavily last season. And then they brought in a great manager in Craig Counsell, formerly of the Milwaukee Brewers. It's always good to take away from your rivals and then add to your own team. And I think that this team should, should perform up to their expectations like they had last season a little bit better. Finishing second in the division is the Cincinnati Reds. I think they will continue to take that next step forward with an 86-76 record. This offense is just phenomenal. I still have questions about the pitching staff, but the offense top to bottom is phenomenal. Unfortunately, Noelvi Marte got suspended, but it's almost like the Reds expected that because they signed Jeimer Candelario before that even, went down. So that kind of worked out in a weird way, but it's a really good roster top to bottom, especially on the offensive side. Pitching needs some work, but that should carry them to a second place finish. And then third in the division, I had to slip my Pittsburgh Pirates in there somehow, and I have them finishing 84-78. I think this is a team that could sneak into the back end of the playoffs just because I look at their roster last year. I think they're better. They have more experience. They had a lot of young players come up last year, and they only are going to get better with another year of experience. You have Henry Davis not in right field anymore. He's actually at the catcher spot where he was drafted and has been his entire career. So that should help him out. He's looked phenomenal this spring. And oh, by the way, they brought back their best player in Oneil Cruz at the shortstop spot. He's going to be phenomenal. I think it's just a team that on paper, they got better. And then they made a lot of good sneaky moves in free agency that I think will make them better and put them at least in the winning record spot. Fourth in the division is the St. Louis Cardinals, finishing 78-84. A lot of this has to do with I have no faith whatsoever in this pitching staff. Beyond Sonny Gray, they really don't have a lot. They have a lot of innings eaters, but they don't have a lot of quality innings coming from that starting rotation. You're hoping for a bounce back from Lance Lynn. You're hoping Kyle Gibson can maybe get back to that all-star form, but it's just you're hinging a lot of your bets on hopes. And I just don't know if that's really the best course of action, especially whenever a lot of the superstars on this team are getting a little bit older. So I just don't have a lot of faith in this Cardinals roster right now as it's constructed. And then I head to the Milwaukee Brewers, who I just have no faith in really from a roster standpoint. I look at it and I'm just like, wow, this is kind of underwhelming. Yes, this Brewers team always seemed to outperform what I expect from it, and maybe it's just me being a hater, I don't know. But I always expect this roster to do a bit worse than it does, but somehow it always works out for the Milwaukee Brewers. In the National League West, I think it's pretty clear you have to put the Dodgers in first. I have them finishing with 105 wins and 57 losses. This is just a stacked roster top to bottom. There's really not much to say. They took their one weakness in starting pitching and said, let's make it a strength, and added superstar after superstar at the position. Obviously, Shohei won't be pitching this year, but, in due time, he will be. Finishing second in the division is the San Francisco Giants. This is coming off the back of the Blake Snell signing. That did just kind of go down right before I made this recording. So here we are, San Francisco Giants finishing second, 83-77. I probably would have put their win total up a little bit more, but I had to get my Pirates into the back end of the playoffs somehow. So the Giants are probably the team that took the hit, so I'm sorry, but it needed to be done. Finishing third in the division is the San Diego Padres with an 82-80 record, which is the exact same record they had last year. Because the San Diego Padres last year underperformed massively. They should have been closer to a 90-win team, but they just could not win a one-run game to save their lives. And I think this team got a lot worse, to be honest. I think a lot of the quality depth that you look at, they couldn't bring back, they couldn't afford anymore, and they all kind of left in free agency. That leaves this team much worse than what they were, but being a much worse team and actually getting the results, about where they should be, will probably leave this team close to where they were last season. And then in the fourth place spot in this division, I had the Arizona Diamondbacks, who were last year's National League representative in the World Series, finishing with a 79-83 record. Much like the Cardinals, I really don't have much faith in this pitching staff. I just don't know that this pitching staff will hold up. Beyond Zach Gallen, there really isn't a lot of established starters who will give you great quality innings. And even Zach Gallen, I think personally, is due for some regression this season. I know he doesn't have a lot of track record for it, but his stats are going in the wrong direction. And I just don't know that he's going to continue to be this elite pitcher that we view him as this season. And then last, we got to talk about the Colorado Rockies, unfortunately. And they will probably finish with even more losses than this, but I gave them the benefit of the doubt with 55 wins and 107 losses. To eclipse 110 losses probably wouldn't be that hard for the Colorado Rockies this season, just being brutally honest, but I gave them the benefit of the doubt. 55 wins, that's where they're at. Before we went too much further, I wanted to talk about some award winners. First off, with the National League Rookie of the Year being my boy Paul Skeens, I think he has the storyline set up to be in this position. He might not start the year with the team just because the Pirates are the Pirates and they're going to try to make the most out of their prospects and make sure that they get one more year out of them. Even though they get draft compensation now for bringing them up early, they're not going to do that. They're going to make sure they have Paul Skeens starting at the year. They'll probably bring him up June-ish, but he is, phenomenal. He's just absolutely great. If he was on a major league roster to start the year, nobody would bat an eye. He'd probably be the ace for this Pirates team right away. And I think whenever you help lead this lowly Pirates team to a back-end postseason performance, like I am saying they will, I don't know how you keep him out of a spot like this. Not suddenly, but on the American League side of things, it's a similar thing where I think Jackson Holliday just takes this Orioles roster to the next level. I think whenever you start filling out superstars on the team and then you go, oh, here's one more that's just going to completely change this team. I think it takes them from good team that's going to make the playoffs to playoff team that can do damage. This team is phenomenal. And then getting experience plus another superstar in Jackson Holliday is just going to be phenomenal. And then he's just going to be great. He's probably going to make the roster from opening day. Even if he doesn't, he'll be up relatively soon. And he's going to put up great numbers all season. There's really not much to say there. For the National League Cy Young, I went ahead and went with Spencer Strider of the Atlanta Braves. He hasn't won it yet, but he's been putting up great numbers for some time now. And it's just about time he's due for it. He puts up great strikeout numbers and just looks great. And he's going to be on one of the best teams in baseball, being the best pitcher. And he's not going to have the crowded room like the Los Angeles Dodgers will. In the American League, I went with a kind of risky pick, but kind of not for Cy Young. Corbin Burnes, newly of the Baltimore Orioles. I had to have a little bit of fun with this. I know Corbin Burnes has been going in the wrong direction since 2020, 2021. But I think being in Baltimore is so helpful just because of that left field fence that got extended out. It's going to help him a lot with his numbers. And I think Corbin Burnes is just, there's too many tools to work with for him to be bad. And I think he's just going to be a good pitcher this year, especially with a good team behind him. For the American League MVP, I went with a also new face to the American League East. That is Juan Soto. It's kind of a similar thing to Corbin Burnes, where it's really just the right player in the right place. Juan Soto's a showman. What better place to put on a show than in Yankee Stadium in New York? Just an absolutely phenomenal place for him to be, the character that he is, as well as he's in Yankee Stadium. That's just a cheat code as it is. That stadium is going to be built for him to hit home runs, and I cannot wait to watch what Juan Soto can do this season. For the National League MVP, I went with a bit of a different route. This one took a little bit more scouting and was just a little bit more out there. I had to have a little bit of an out there pick for at least one of these. It's going to be Dansby Swanson of the Chicago Cubs. Hear me out. I know you're typing. He is pulling the ball in the air more often than not last season, more often than he had been in any part of his career up to this point last season. And he had the great batted ball data that he had with the Atlanta Braves in 2021, where he looked absolutely phenomenal. Am I saying he's going to be like this elite, like historic season? No. But I'm saying he could put up 30 home runs next season and play the best defensive, shortstop we have in the major league. I think that is a recipe to be up there in the conversation. Absolutely. To win it, that's kind of iffy. He might need some injuries to fall his way, but I'm going to give Dansby Swanson the benefit of the doubt. I think he can do it this season. I know he has the potential. We all know he has the great defense, has the pop sometimes, and sometimes the bat comes along with it. But this year, Dansby Swanson breaks out. I don't know why I think that other than what I've told you so far. This is the year. So to quickly run you through the playoffs, we'll start on the National League side. Starting off, we have the Pittsburgh Pirates and Chicago Cubs facing off in the wild card round. That leaves the Pittsburgh Pirates in a 3-game series versus the Cubs. For some reason, and because the Cubs aren't that, that overly powering of a team, I'm going to give it to the Pirates just because they're my favorite team, and that's just how it's going to be. Moving to the bottom half of the bracket in the wild card round, we have the Reds and we have the Philadelphia Phillies. The Phillies are a very strong team, and I cannot give it to the Reds in that one. I apologize. I think the Phillies are just too good of a team for the Reds to face. Getting Wheeler, getting Nola in that short of a series is just not fair. And the Reds, I know they have a great offense, but the pitching staff also against that offense is just going to be a nightmare. And that brings the Phillies to the Atlanta Braves once again. I've made this mistake 2 years in a row saying the Braves are going to win, and the Phillies end up going out and kicking their ass. So I'm going to do it again. The Atlanta Braves are going to win again. The Atlanta Braves will beat the Philadelphia Phillies, making it to the championship series, and they'll be facing the Dodgers. I don't even really need to talk about a Pirates versus Dodgers 5-game series. Like, there's just no point in even having that conversation because the Pirates don't stand a chance. I understand that. Having them this far into the series and in the season would just be a blessing as a Pirates fan. So I'm gonna, you know, I'm gonna pump the brakes a little bit right there, and then I'm gonna have the Dodgers making it through to the World Series over the Atlanta Braves. I think here's just gonna be a pitching staff diff. I think that the people they brought in is just a phenomenal group of guys, and I think that this team is set to do special things this year, and I think the Dodgers will make the World Series. On the American League side of things, we had the Toronto Blue Jays versus the Minnesota Twins once again, and I think history will repeat itself here, and the Minnesota Twins will find their way through to the divisional round. And then on the bottom side of things, you have the Texas Rangers versus the New York Yankees. At this point, the Texas Rangers will have all of their starting pitching back and healthy. The Yankees will have Garrett Cole by this point, but I think that the Texas Rangers offense will prove to be too much, and they will make it to the next round to once again versus Baltimore. But history will not repeat itself here. Baltimore is set up in a much better spot this year to take this series. I think they'll have a lot more confidence coming into a series like this, especially after last year's experience, and Baltimore will win this series. And then you head up to the top part again. It's Minnesota versus Houston. We saw this last year. The Astros, they had their struggles, but they eventually came through. But I think the Minnesota Twins, again, it's going to come off that experience that they got last year, will be hungry to win this series, and they will. I think they're a worse team, but, and I think the Astros are a better team. So it really makes no logical sense whatsoever. But sometimes that happens in the playoffs, and I'm going to go ahead and take the Minnesota Twins. So that leaves the Minnesota Twins and the Baltimore Orioles in the American League Championship Series. And I think the Baltimore Orioles are just a team at that point. I think they just have a better overall roster, top to bottom, than the Minnesota Twins. I think their just prospects are just a bit better, and I just like this Baltimore Orioles rosters a whole lot. So that leaves you with the Los Angeles Dodgers and Baltimore Orioles. Again, I don't know if anyone's catching the Dodgers this year. I love this Baltimore Orioles roster, but it's the Dodgers' year this year. I think they will win it. They have so stacked of a roster top to bottom. They have good coaching. They have everything you could ask for. They have good pitching, good bullpen, good lineup, good defense. Like anything you could ask for, they're going to have it. And I just love this Dodgers team in terms of just roster construction. And I think they'll win it. And we'll go ahead and give the MVP to Shohei Ohtani because he shows up in big games. We saw it in the World Baseball Classic. I think this team is just set to do big things, and Shohei Ohtani will be the face of that, winning his first World Series in the MLB. Let me know what I got right. Let me know what I got wrong. I'm sure you guys are feverishly typing down below. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.